So Brian Dooley, I got to talk to him about 5 months ago, and he's been on a journey on demand translation. And he's going to talk to you about DDMRP and his adoption of DemandDriven. And I want you to listen to this because I think we do not translate demand well into material requirements. In fact, I find most procurement organizations operate as silos. And I want you to think hard about demand translation and what this could be as we think about outside-in processes. So Brian, I know you're somewhere in the group. Oh, you're right in front of me, yeah? If you can come up and tell the group a little bit about yourself and your journey. The other thing I really like about this case study is this is a transformation case study. Brian had to kind of stick his neck out to get this going. So tell the group a little bit about yourself.
Yep, okay, so I work for British Telecom, and within British Telecom I sit in something called the IMC, which is the Inventory Management Centre, and my role and responsibility is to look after supply chain planning for all of our lines of business, both internal customers, so we're a large group, all our internal customers, but also our external customers as well, so we sell our services to the external market.
So with that, I'm going to let you tell your story and your
Great.
transformation, and then you're going to come back and be on our panel after break.
Excellent. Right, I suppose just a bit of background on British Telecom, because I appreciate this is not necessarily a British audience and one who knows who British Telecom are. You may have heard of them, and when I've done some of these talks before, a lot of the questions I get is, well, okay, you're a service provider. What's this got to do with supply chain? Well, actually, we have a lot of supply chains within our business. So we have retail supply chains. So we sell broadband equipment, network equipment, home Wi-Fi devices, baby monitors, all that kind of stuff, direct through our own e-commerce channels to retail customers. We also wholesale those products to the big high street retailers in the UK who sell those on our behalf as BT branded product. So that's one area of supply chain that we have. So we have a retail supply chain, both B2B, B2C, e-commerce. A massive supply chain that we have is our engineering supply chain. So we actually build and construct and maintain all of the telecoms network infrastructure within the UK, or most of it. There are a few specialist smaller players, but all of the cables in the ground running from the telephone exchanges right to customers' properties, be that business, residential. So all of that work, and that's everything from the engineer's van, the tools in that van, his laptop, his iPhone, then all of the materials that he needs, including cables. So everything from a pair of pliers to a 10-ton drum of copper cable and all things in between. So we have about 120,000 SKUs. We own our own physical distribution network, so we don't contract it out. So we have 2 large national distribution centres in the UK, and then fairly uniquely we have a network of 96 what we call forward stock locations, which are basically like I don't know whether the same thing kind of exists in the States, but like a trade counter, so a smallish warehouse. Every engineer is within 30, 40 minutes travel time of one of these, and that's where the engineer will go in each day to pick up the tools and equipment and materials they need to do whatever's on their job card. We have 28,000 engineers across the country, so we're planning all of the stores, all of the inventory for those 28,000 engineers. So that's just to give you a bit of context as to what British Telecom is from a supply chain perspective. As I say, I sit in the Inventory Management Centre, which sits in BT Supply Chain, and BT Supply Chain is a line of business in its own right within British Telecom. And as I alluded to, we actually sell our services as a 3PL, in effect, to the external marketplace. So that unique distribution infrastructure we've got in the UK, not only do we use that for our own needs, we also sell that to to external parties. And part of what I'm going to talk about today is so new and so disruptive that it's actually winning us some external business out there purely from the new approach to supply chain planning that we're taking. So what I want to take you through is kind of the last 18 months in about 20 minutes. So I've done one race already this morning, so this is going to be the next one. And we're going to look at the case for change. So really, why did we get to the position that we got to? Why did we feel we wanted to do something differently? How did we enable demand-driven? And then a look at what does end-to-end demand-driven planning mean to us? A quick look at results at a very high level, and then what I see as the key takeaways, things to think about. And that street sign there kind of sums up what we've done in the past 18 months. It was we either do more of the same or we make some significant change. So the case for change, I guess for us the problem statement was our forecasts are just not accurate enough. I'm 25 years plus in supply chain. All of my time in supply chain has been predominantly in supply chain planning. So, I'm well schooled in, we improve forecast accuracy, we can take our safety stock down, service levels can improve, happy days. That graph at the bottom there is a snapshot from our cables manufacturing business. So what I didn't say in the introduction is we also have our own manufacturing operations as well. So as well as being a major distribution network, we have our own manufacturing operations. And what that's showing is the green bars, so it's SKU level forecast accuracy. The green bars are those SKUs where our accuracy is plus or minus 20%. The yellow where it's plus or minus 50%, and then the red is those SKUs beyond 50% error. And that's, anyone involved in forecasting forecast accuracy, that's not an unusual chart. Plus minus 20% on your faster moving items is pretty good forecast accuracy wise. But we've got over half of that portfolio were more than 50% wrong. And even the ones where we're 20% right, we're generating a plan based on that. We're placing orders on suppliers, putting inventory into our warehouses based on something that's 20% wrong or possibly 50% wrong or more than 50% wrong. Where else in the business would you make decisions based on data that's that inaccurate? And inevitably what that does, it destroys flow in the supply chain. Supply chains work best when they flow. We end up with schedule break-ins, so the poor supply planner is on the phone, every day to the factory. This is now not urgent, this is urgent. Can you break into the schedule? Can you change this batch to that batch? We're expediting with associated costs. And we have both stockouts and overstocks, because within that forecast error, we've got pretty much a 50-50 split of over-forecast items and under-forecast items. And that just causes us to lurch between feast and famine on our inventory, because we're pushing to forecast. Our traditional DRP engine, MRP engine is placing purchase orders based on a forecasted, planned order that we think is going to happen, but is not necessarily going to happen. And all of that is cost. So what's the answer? Well, it's obvious, as the man in the shiny suit from the forecast software company will tell you. Just improve your forecast accuracy. Improve our forecast accuracy, and that's it. Problem solved. And that was, as I say that, I've made a career out of that for 25 years. That was the journey we went on. We started implementing demand forecasting solution, supply chain optimization solution from one of the big two. But it just didn't feel right. It was too rigid. There was too many assumptions having to be made. Every time we said, well, actually, we want to do this. Well, you need another module for that, and that'll be X million. And so we kind of paused. And I think this is a great quote really from Henry Ford, where he said, if I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. And that kind of, to me, is sort of where we've been in supply chain planning for the last 20 years. It's just the solution's obvious. We want a more accurate forecast. Let's just keep trying to get a more accurate forecast. And so what we actually did was say, well, are we solving the wrong problem here? Actually, is there a different way? What's better than trying to get a more accurate forecast? Well, our best indication of demand is what the real demand is. What is our actual customer demand? So what happened was a small group, it was me and my direct team. I'd read a few papers about DDMRP, heard it, kind of thought that all sounds a bit too good to be true. So we put ourselves on a training course, understood it, became certified demand-driven planners, and to take sort of Laura's description yesterday, we formed a small, scrappy team, which if any of you have seen my team, scrappy is a great description of them. I've just realised this is being streamed, isn't it? So hopefully they're not watching it. And we built a proof of concept model, which you can do in Excel. I'm not going to show that today, but happy to chat about it with anyone later. And then ran a pilot to say, okay, well, does this actually work? You know, let's test the theory. So just before I go on to that slide, just out of interest, show of hands, who in the room has heard of DDMRP? Okay, so probably 30%. So that's probably more than I expected. I first gave one of these presentations about a year ago, and it was about 3 people in the room. So clearly, certainly the acronym is getting out there. So, what is DDMRP in about 2 minutes? Essentially, it's positioning strategic inventory buffers that are independently planned in between our demand side and our supply side. And those buffers really are there to accept that, we have variability in our supply chain. Let's accept it. Let's get over it. And what the DDI, the Demand-Driven Institute, has done is kind of codified how do you calculate the size of this buffer, and it's split into a green zone, a yellow zone, and a red zone. The maths is on there. You can see it's really, really dead straightforward, which is why it's simple to build a proof of concept and a pilot in Excel just to test the theory. And the way it works is you calculate something called net flow, which is basically your on-hand stock position plus your open purchase orders minus any customer orders. Really simple then, a bit like Kanban. When net flow drops below the green zone, you place a purchase order to go back up to top of green. But the crucial difference here from push to forecast is the only thing that's going to drop that net flow is real demand happening, so real consumption of stock. So when you place an order, it's because real demand has happened and you're responding to that demand and you're actually buying product that you actually want because you've used it. So a fairly simple concept. It is to me. I think it's elegantly simple. It's very. I think people either get it or they don't get it. And actually, what it does really is it puts the way I think about it is it's about putting the supply chain capability in place to meet the demand we expect to happen, but not actually ordering stock based on planned orders out in the future. Yes, there's some stock commitment to fill the buffer and place those initial purchase orders, but post that point, it's all driven by real demand, and that's really what it's about. That's not to say forecast is not important and isn't used. So you'll see something in there called ADU, average daily usage. So that's a key ingredient in the buffer sizing. If you've got a really stable product, you can take that straight from your history, or that's where your forecast comes in. So if The future is not going to be like the past. You know something that's happening, you've got some business insight or intelligence. That goes in to scale the size of that buffer. So you're putting the right capability in place in the supply chain to cope with that demand you're expecting to get, but then you allow the replenishment to just respond pretty much autonomously to the demand as it happens. If demand happens slightly faster than you expected, it'll just trigger purchase orders slightly more frequently. If it happens slower than you expected, it'll just trigger purchase orders slightly more slowly. So getting that mix correct becomes an awful lot easier. So, and I think just before I go on to this slide, one of the questions Laura asked me was, so people seem to think that demand-driven is just DDMRP. Absolutely not, and hopefully this slide will articulate that. DDMRP, the reason that was in the slide saying enabling demand-driven, it's exactly that. It's an enabler to demand-driven. It's a key component of it, but if you put DDMRP in place, you're probably in a better place than just push to forecast. But in my mind, that's still not true demand-driven. So what we have is DDMRP runs daily, so our actual demand comes in. The solution we use is Orchestrate, so it's a cloud-based solution. So this allowed us to sort of get up and running and go live really, really quickly. So again, sort of parallels to a lot of what we heard yesterday. You know, we leave the big ERP machine to do what the big ERP machine does, and actually we bring best-of-breed specialist software to sit on top of it to do the clever bits. That's cloud-based, so it's quick to implement. And just one of the things you can see on that there, that color coding, the red, yellow, green, this is one of the really valuable bits of DDMRP. So that is relative buffer position. So where am I in my buffer? So the red is my urgent stuff, the yellow stuff is next stuff down, and then the green is I'm okay. And this is for us, it was a completely different way of looking at priorities. So I'm not talking to my suppliers about what's the next due date purchase order. My priority is which ones are in red. I don't care what the due date is. They're the ones I want you to focus on. The ones that are in green, actually, if you're 4 or 5 days late, I don't really care. I've got enough in the buffer to cope with that. That gives you, the supplier, your flexibility to jiggle your schedule around. And through Orchestrate, we have a supplier portal they can log on to and just access that and see real priorities. And that's one of the big areas where we've had positive feedback from our suppliers. So the next bit then is our SNOP process, or DDSNOP, so demand-driven SNOP. So this really is now the monthly process where, I guess historically, this would be the punch-up with operations and sales and marketing over forecast accuracy. So supply chain planners, favourite get-out-of-jail-free card. Thank God, it's not my fault. The forecast is miles out. It's all your fault, sales. So now, SNOP is more about what are the parameters that I want to put into that model to shape and size those buffers. And what we've found here is we can have conversations now in the right language with sales and operations. So we're not just saying, you have to give me by item code, by month, a detailed forecast, otherwise I can't plan. We can take qualitative input now, because hopefully you can see from those buffers, if they know something is taking place in the market, so we're running a promotion, we expect to do more fiber connections and use more of a certain component. We don't quite know how much, but we reckon it'll be a 20 to 30% uplift. We can just flex all of the associated related buffers by 20 or 30%, which will put a little bit of purchase order cover in. But once that's happened, it then waits for the demand to actually happen and see which components are really driving and use that to drive the replenishment. So that's what our DDSNOP monthly cycle is focused on now. It's about the parameters that we set up and configure in the model to put that capability in place to allow the supply chain to just react then to demand as it happens. And this now is where the hard planning work goes in. So planner's role now is not firefighting, expediting, what's the latest crisis. It's get this right up front and actually, one of our autonomous robots, machine learning or whatever, could place the orders for us because we've set the buffers right. We can just let it respond to demand. The weekly bit, we just have a review there where anything where, buffers might be collapsing because demand has just gone completely off the charts and no one told us about it, we can go in and make a short-term adjustment to the buffers. And then the final bit of our SNOP process, for us, is a quarterly process that fits in with our business planning cycle. And this really is where the overall business strategy, for us, a lot of that is driven by technology, also by government influence, regulatory influence. So how much of the UK has got to have super fast connections to fibre may drive where our engineers' activity is targeted. And here it's more about running forward projections and simulations to say, well, okay, this is the business strategy. Now let's run that through the buffers, see what that means from a capacity standpoint, a inventory investment standpoint, do all of those checks and balances, add up. Have we got the capacity to do it to the time frame that operations want to, or do we need to look at rephasing that slightly? So that's why it's shown as a continuous loop, because that process works in both directions as we get to that position. And in effect, coming out of that is our demand forecast. But that demand forecast can be at a more aggregate level. So to bring it back to the cables example with the forecast accuracy at the start, here now we only look at forecast at the total aggregate capacity requirement for the plant, because actually the mix of product we can control quite easily. We let DDMRP drive the product mix. So we let the buffers drive what mix actually goes to the plant, and all we talk about is what's the aggregate capacity we need to lay down. So that's our planning process in a nutshell. So results, I think we've de-risked our supply chain from forecast accuracy. Doesn't mean forecast is not important. We've had a strong impact on cash flow and return on capital employed, because we're now making, buying, storing the right stuff that we're actually using, not just the stuff that we thought we might use. We've maintained or improved service levels whilst reducing inventory. So that supply chain holy grail of better service from less stock. Supply chain capacity has been reduced because, again, we're not producing, buying, storing the wrong stuff. So for us on our 3PL side, this creates us the capacity, the space in our network to use that for revenue generation and sell it. And cost reduction from lower planning effort, lower expedite costs, all of that cost of failure. So to close, key takeaways. So for me, demand-driven doesn't mean better forecasting. So quite often, I see papers come across my desk or invitations or whatever to say, we're demand-driven because our forecast is based on the demand and we've got a super-duper engine that will make the forecast more accurate. Neither is it just DDMRP in isolation. DDMRP is an enabler to it. The change management challenge is huge. This is, hopefully it sounds simple how I've explained it. To me, it's elegantly simple, and that's part of the attraction, and it allows some beautifully simple conversations up and down the organisation, but it is difficult for some people to get their heads around. And in particular, which surprised us, is actually the supply chain planning community. This is here for their benefit, but they're so entrenched in years and years and years of calculate my safety stock from forecast error, put it into my DRP, MRP sausage machine, spit out the results, then go into firefighting mode and be a hero. And they find this really, really difficult sometimes. But those that embrace it see the benefit very quickly. Just have a go. Get some education, get some training in it, build a proof of concept in Excel on a small portfolio of products, small scrappy team, have a go at it, do it, it works. And SaaS, software solutions, make it possible quickly. And what we now have is happy planners, happy to come in the office, those who've embraced it, because their life is completely different now. They're now focused on real value add, intelligent stuff up front, sizing the buffers, getting that business insight, what's going to happen with demand. Let me make sure I've got the right capability in place in the supply chain, and then actually this replenishment stuff and purchase order stuff, just let it take care of itself. The end, I think. Yeah.
You know, when we think about demand and we think about the bullet effect, forecasts were translated into distribution resource planning, but never into MRP. So I think this is a great step forward as a tactic to really translate demand for those buffers. But people are so safety stock minded, right? And they're so reactive in their whole approach that I think it really does require rewiring the brain a little bit.
Yes, and absolutely in the supply chain world. So after initial resistance in finance and stuff, they've now understand it, see the benefits, and they're the biggest fan. And some of our greatest resistance is within the supply chain community.
Which is just amazing, isn't
Yeah.
it? Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Brian.
Thank
you. You're going to join us for the panel a little
Yes.
later on.